Good morning, Joe Wenberg, Bluebird Semaphore. I'm going to do a video this morning. Not that I have anything in particular to say or do, but I just don't want to get out of the habit of making a video now and then. I'm waiting for once again, some technology issues to clear up before I put my planned next video. So, and I don't know when that'll be, I mean, these computer companies and software companies, they're so obnoxious. They just think who the hell they are, but what are you going to do? The only one that, for my uses, and I'm going to sound like I'm patronizing them, but YouTube at least allows you to muddle through and get what you want done. And having said YouTube, one of the reasons I've been so long on making another video is that my time these days is pretty much absorbed between either reading or paying attention to these documentaries that are on YouTube. And there are a lot of documentaries on YouTube that are, in a way, moving to, presenting some scholarly work. And, and that's what pretty much I've been paying attention to is these professors from this, that, and the other university, and primarily historians, and I listen to what they have to say. One thing I want to tell you, I know I said way in the beginning that I am not an historian, and I say that again. But now that I'm watching these guys that are trained professional historians, lots of them associated with some of the best institutions of higher learning, I mean, I can tell how seriously these guys are not like me or like many of the people who are putting up what they think are histories of this, that, and the other thing. And they have these magic cartoon-like videos that they insert in their speech. And those people are not the guys that I'm honing in on. The guys I'm honing in on, and gals, are true trained historians. And I've already learned an awful lot. First of all, I've learned that I don't know anything when it comes to world history. I know next to nothing. But, like for example, and this wasn't a document from a documentary, but this was from one of the latest books I picked up to start reading. And it has nothing to do with the material that I should be reading for the next video, which has the title, and I may have told you that before, the History of England and Western Europe. I was going to say from the glacial maximum, or whatever that word is. I'll look it up. I am going to use that to I was going to say Edgar, the composer, what's his name? Whatever. It's the composer Edgar something, and his egg something variations. I am going to make that whole long. That's going to be the title, because the talk in this video, which I am doing it in a Word document so that I can eventually pass it along as a book. But so and it is going to cover from way back, say 200,000 years 300,000 years when our ancestors were, these horrible brutes. And it's going to move right through, the important steps in our evolution, particularly our social evolution, which would put us, somehow past the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century. And Edgar, his variations, I forget what the full name is, his variations, I think is a stunning example of what humans eventually were able to do, having lived out there hundreds of thousands of years as brutes, and then taking a step by step a journey into a type of existence that had more to do with thinking and intellect than it had 200,000 years ago. And I'm not sure that that's truly what I wanted to say today, but I said it anyway. So I'm going to try to get back into that. Well, I get into it a little at a time. The world English history and Western European history of England and Western Europe. I get into that a little bit all the time, because I keep stretching the imagination. And by the way, this is not going to be a scholarly history at all. It's not even going to be the truth. This isn't going to be a novel. Once again, a novel. Now, as you know, I have already 2 novels, or maybe you don't know, but I have Blackbird, which the 800-pound gorilla published and then said, oh no, I'm not going to publish it anymore after 2 weeks of making it available. And then the other one, which I haven't done anything with yet, and that one's called even that I can't recollect right now. The Witness to an Execution, The Big Juju Ferry of West Africa. That's the second novel, which I haven't done anything on. Because why? The 800-pound gorilla is not going to work with me. So what am I going to do? I'll have a solution. So I always get a solution. I'll have one sooner or later. And whatever I find is doable to make what I write appear as a book, I'll apply it to this thing, History of England and Western Europe, from the glacial maximum, something like that, to Sir Edgar somebody, variations. I will do that. That'll be the title of that book. And once again, it's not facts. It's not facts. The first guy, the brute, is entirely fictitious. Person, male, brutal, no capacity for thought. And that's how that thing is starting and how it's going. So, top of all of this, I've gathered up bunches of books to keep me going. And one, this has been a main boogeyman with me, is the way societies are structured throughout history. You have the ruling classes, and then you have everybody else. And I've been very tolerant about that. Many an historian has over time convinced me that that's the way it's got to be. That for hundreds and hundreds of years, via genetic isolation, genetic combinations, and so on, a very tight at the top grouping of people comes to collect, and they come to be the ruling elite. And I've been convinced, mostly, almost convinced, that this is the natural order of things and this is the way it must be. But I'm not willing to let them off the hook that easily. Because A, they're always, with the slippery tongue and the being two-faced about things. So right now, one of the books I picked up, and I'm telling you right now, I'm going to champion this guy, this biography. This biography is about John Adams, and I'm going to champion him. Because I think that in the grand scheme of things, he's probably a good and righteous man. The second president, I think. But, in his household, I have seen where within his household, it has been said by at least one member that slavery is a sin. Yet, there they are. They have their servants to serve them. Well, somebody write into me and tell me what's the big difference about being a slave or being a servant. As long as you have to do somebody else's dirty work for them, work that they don't want to do themselves, there's no difference. There's no difference. In some cases, the slaves were treated horribly. Like they could be beaten and given horrible quarters, but they were still, they had to do what their master said. And a servant has to do the same thing. And that's where the human part of these people that are behaving as servants is overlooked. Nobody wants to be under the thumb of somebody else. Nobody. We do it today in the millions. Our employees in the millions are under the thumb of somebody else. And they are acting as servants. They get compensated, big deal. They're still very capable of walking on their job site and being humiliated and denigrated by their masters, the so-called, managers and directors and all sorts of baloney-ness. That has to get out of the societies. This idea of having people under the thumb of other people. That has to be gotten rid of before you could say you solve the problem of inequity. It's just, that's the key. Nobody's under anybody else's thumb. The word ruling has to be eliminated. Democracy has to become democracy, where people are collectively making the decisions about how they're going to live. And as you know, that's not the case anymore. It may have been the case in Athens at 500 BC, but it's not the case anymore. And as a matter of fact, and I'm going to go out on a limb here because I don't know that much about it, but I'm starting to see the British system of democracy as at least in some ways superior to the United States system. In Britain, they have the House of Commons, which is essentially the law creating institution. And the way that works is they have 450 so on areas that the country is cut up into. And each one of those areas gets a representative. And the people vote for who they want. And they have about 5 parties: Labor, Liberal, Tory, Conservative, and I don't know what else. Socialist or something. I don't know. But they have about 5 parties. And you vote for them. The one with the most votes wins. Okay? And that, to me, is a little closer to democracy than what we have. This hodgepodge, everybody votes. You get one guy could get actually less votes than the other guy, but he still wins the election because of the way they count the votes. A weighted counting. This state gets more votes than that state. So, and let's face it, with the ability for the lobbyists to buy all those votes, is nothing remotely democratic by that political system. Now, they try their best to make the citizens of the United States believe that they have democracy. They try their best. And basically, the argument is, hey, what are you going to do? There's nothing you can do. This is what you got. Live with it. This is what you got. You have no representation. The lobbyists buy the vote, and you go through a sham election. That's what you do. So, now I'm not sure, but obviously England must have its bag of lobbyists as well. I don't know. But I do rather like the idea of the House of Commons and the land being cut up into 400 or 500 geographical areas, and everybody in that geographical area gets to vote. Now, I believe it's also more probable that in that system you would get to know your representative a little better than in our system. I really believe that. I think in our system, you're not going to see these guys. They get elected, they're gone. They're gone. They run their, whatever they do. I don't know what they do. But, and it's not always like that, and it's not all of the people in the House in the Congress, the House of Representatives. It's not all, or the Senate. Obviously, there must be some good ones. Some ones who can tell right from wrong. And let me tell you, there's no way, in my mind, you can justify having the lobbyist buy your vote. There's no way. There's no way. You can't justify that. I'm sorry. It's not it. And I'll also go on to say that we got off on a wrong foot from day one. From day one. Those original founding fathers, the original congressmen, senators, whatever you want, they believed they were a special case. They were an elite, and that they knew better than the humble folk who knew nothing in their eyes. Okay, so, and that concept just grew and grew and grew until you got what you got today. Basically, the way I see it, and I mean, I'm to blame, I'm at fault at this as anybody else, is basically nobody cares anymore. Nobody cares who's in Albany or who's in Trenton or who's in Washington, D.C. Nobody cares because we know they've all been bought. So why care? Nobody cares. Anyway, I care enough to continue to listen to these historians who shed more and more light on the world and how it got to be this way. And to their credit, they don't seem so far to go so deep into the subject matter that you can't understand. But what I did pick out from these lectures is that they also feel that these talks are only for the well-educated few, because they can throw terms in there that only the well-educated would know. And in other words, they're saying, we know who our audience is, and we're speaking to them. We're not speaking to Johnny this or Johnny that, Johnny the nobody. They're talking to a select well-educated few. It's always been my case, not my case, but my belief that with the overabundance of colleges in this country, I mean, these people aren't getting well-educated. For the most part, they're learning how to do a slightly more skilled craft than erstwhile. When years ago, people would become something. I don't want to denigrate any type of working person, so I won't mention. But I mean, for eons, for years and years and years, you didn't need to go to college to get a good job. You say that all the time. Up through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. Then it started getting a little weird. But you got out of high school, you went into AT&T, you went into General Electric, Westinghouse, you went into IBM, maybe, and you worked. And you worked for 30 years, you retired, you went home. But now they want everybody to have a college degree. As a matter of fact, the last company I worked for, before it got bought out by the maggots from Europe, they required, as I was getting towards my last days there, actually last years, they said, okay, from now on, you can't even talk to us about a job unless you have 2 years of college. And they would talk about any job, a security guard or something, anybody who was going to work for them was going to have 2 years of college. So that requirement is full blown now. People are going to college. You got to believe that the college lobby is behind that kind of thinking. How can we get more people to come in and lay down somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 to sit in our rooms for 4 years? How can we do that? Well, we'll start to get these companies to insist that to become a pill counter, okay, in some pharmacy, you got to have a college degree. It's just insane. However, life goes on, that's what it's going. And I got to also tell you, by paying attention to these documentaries, that I cull through them. I don't look at every document. Some of them are just, total nonsense and fantasy. But I pick out ones that are scholarly and drill down on them. And many of them aren't painting a very big picture. Like, they talk more and more about the possibility. Not that it's imminent or anything like that, but that the countries that are going to go to war in the future are going to be China and the United States. And that's not anything you want to be looking forward to, And in numerous lectures, various professors are pointing out that Russia is basically the loser here, big time, has lost its status, its prestige, its economic base. It's gone. And they point out that this is the history of Russia. Russia comes and goes. And You don't want to be around in a war between China and anybody else because China is just, when it comes to saving their neck, they will do the most brutal things imaginable. That's what they'll do. Now, all the other big powers will do almost the same thing, but not quite the same as China. So you don't want to be around for that. Of course, they'll probably use nuclear war weapons by then. We'll see what happens. Anyway, I did my deed for the day, which is I wanted to keep in practice making a video and making my YouTube channel look active. That YouTube channel being Bluebird Semaphore. Okay, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day. I think this is a Saturday. It's Labor Day weekend, so you have a nice weekend. Hope you're going to do something pleasant. And if you think I have a nonchalant attitude about what's happening with the world, well, the fact of the matter is I do. I'm 78 years old. You know, let's say China puts us all in the a similar situation as the Russian gulag. You know, I gotta hack it out for 10 years. That's it. And by the way, one of these documentaries went in a little bit in depth about that guy Shushkinesky in the Gulag Archipelago, and he's quite an interesting guy. As a matter of fact, numerous times I've picked up that book and I put it down because thinking that it's just too monumental and it probably is covering much more than I need to know. But he seems to be a very interesting man, somebody to pay attention to. And I've always paid attention to the Russian writers. They've always been great. And I got to say, they've been greater than most other national writers. You know, except, England's got a couple there with Dickens and a few others, Conrad, such. But the Russians, you can't ignore. They're writers. They are supreme, very, very important. And also, I'm trying my best to get reacquainted with Louis Borquet, I think is the best way to say his name. He's this Argentine writer. I want to say he got a Nobel Prize, but I'm not sure. But a great writer, very, very much in the mystical, but in the intelligent mystical vein. And I had a book of his around somewhere. I thought it was out in my man cave, and I checked yesterday, it's not there. So I got to tear all these books apart, find it. Or I'll come across it somewhere for $2 and I'll be fine. Anyway, and I'm not talking about, there's a novel of his, I believe, or maybe, well, listen, I read some of his short stories. And I just absolutely thrilled with him. I mean, he's just wonderful. But I didn't finish up. I didn't follow up. That's been one of my serious defects, no follow through. I could never beat Tom Seaver. He had a great follow up. And by the way, my mentor in the world of poetry, who was Ruth Lisa Schechter, she asked me if I had read anything by Borquet. And I said no. She was very, very adamant that I should get to know the guy. So I did get to know him. And so that was that. And I've already said goodbye. I'm going to keep my word. Goodbye. I wish I could talk to you about every book I've ever read, because it would be fun for me anyway, at least. I tend to remember most of what these books I read are about. I tend to remember that. So it would give me a chance to just, in a very freestyle fashion, go through these books. And I will tell you right now, I was absolutely pleased beyond your imagination. There's a YouTube channel with some dude, I think he's a graduate of Oxford, very young kid, and he looks very much like the young kids of today, t-shirt, messy hair a little bit, but just, well-educated kid. And one of his things up there is a listing of the 50 greatest books. Now, it's really culled down from a listing of 100 of the greatest books, and I think the greatest English literature books, I think. But he just was presented 50. So he presented them from 50 down to 1. And this is why I was so thrilled, because I read just about every book on that list, except for maybe 6. Every one. And I couldn't believe it. I thought maybe he'd go down the list, maybe I'd get 10, 15 that I read. Every one. So that obviously I wasn't far off the mark when I picked these books. And for the most part, I picked them myself. I wasn't in some college class where the professor was telling me what to read. I picked these all myself. And I really, if you get a chance, go see that video on YouTube. It's the 50 greatest books. Young kid, you'll recognize him. And I'm not sure what his first name is, but it might be Brian. I don't know. And you read that, and if you haven't read those books, if you've only read some of them, I'm sure you'll be totally encouraged to read all of them. And not all of them, but 2 or 3 other novels by those authors. Okay? For example, if on the book is Far from the Maddening Crowd, and I don't know if it is, by Hardy, but he's on the list, you'll want to read 3 or 4 others by Hardy. I think he might have 2 on there. Or Conrad. He definitely, Heart of Darkness is definitely there. But and I think another one, I don't know which one. But you'll want to read, and Hardy, you got 20 novels there to pick from. It's plenty. Yeah. But, you could always just spend your life watching television. This current TV series, which continuously get more and more vulgar and more of no meaning, no reason, no rationale. There's nothing there. There's nothing in these things but bashing people in the face, killing, nothing. But you could spend your life watching them. You'll be entertained. You'll forget the terribleness of being at work for the better part of the day. You'll be fine. And why should you not be fine? You read these books. Some of them are gonna make you think. And God Almighty, that's the last thing you want to do is think. As you think, it's going to start to hurt. So don't think. Take my word for it. Listen, I could go on and on and on. And maybe someday I will. Maybe someday I'll get all my books stacked up and we'll go through them. Just like I want to do with my paintings, I want to show you my paintings, this and that and the other thing. But someday, maybe not. Maybe someday soon. We'll see. All right, I got to hit this button.